kind of sticking to Sunday nights, really talking about the sermon, talking about life, talking about topics that maybe people are interested in. If you have a comment or a question or a thought, we'd love to have you just type it into the Facebook, what you're watching on right now in the comment section. Let us know, because it gives us an opportunity to interact with you a little bit more. And we can kind of hear and think possibly, what are your questions? What are your thoughts about the perspectives that we're talking about as well?
Mm-hmm. And you kind of began with both feet in the water today, talking about what it means to be Christ's love letter. Mm-hmm. And in particular, talking about relationships. Yep. And I thought it was an outstanding sermon, once again, no surprise to me. But as I was listening to you this morning, I was really very grateful for the words that you had to say. Now, you wanted to start off with the funny video this morning. We've referred to it a few times. What prompted you to do that?
It's a great question, and a great thought. It was interesting. I had another plan before this video came out, and I wanted to kind of have a Toby Mac song, kind of basically the song that kind of talks about his relationship with his son and how they had this difficult relationship, and that someday they would see the light. There would be this moment where they would come together and things would be clear and they would have a better relationship. And well, because of copyright issues and things like that, I was advised that wouldn't be a good perspective or a good starting point for our service. So I thought, well, what could I do to maybe help us come to a real honest, have an honest conversation about difficult topics, difficult things. And obviously in that video that many of you maybe got to see this morning, it just has the pastor who is a real guy dealing with real issues, and there is a lot of conflicts that's going on that he's kind of addressing. Stop it, quit fighting. Dan, why do you got to be so bad? I mean, and a lot of it had to do with relationships, and a lot of it had to do with the conflict that probably, in the church they were having. And I just thought it would be funny. We've seen it shown it probably a couple other times in 10 years, so I figured it's worth showing. So if you got to see it for the first time, I think people always get a kind of a good kick out of that.
Yeah, I always enjoy seeing it. I see different things every time I watch it. But I can really, obviously being a pastor, identify with this guy who is at a loss. How do I help people? Mm-hmm. And especially in regards to relationships. I remember one of the things that I used to say often as a pastor is it would be a really great job if it wasn't for the people.
Sure. Yeah.
And it just has a way of, just when you get things going, something over here goes off kilter, and then you try to fix that, and then what you had going. It reminds me of the old plate spinner. The guy that's trying to keep all of his plates spinning on top of the pole, and just as soon as he gets them all going, one starts to wobble a little bit, and there we are. And as human beings, it just seems like our relationships can be so fragile.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is anything new in our culture. It obviously was there when Jesus was around too.
It seems like throughout ever since Adam and Eve and the children they had and things like that, there's always been conflict. And when I think about our church and our community and kind of where we are now, I see conflict. I see relationships and marriages that are having conflict. I see conflict with just like sort of like friendships, or even maybe not friendships, people are coming in my office quite frequently trying to understand and trying to relate, which is relationship with someone, a boss, a coworker, a situation, another family. And in all those things, it's difficult to really understand what to do, how to do it. And then my question to us this morning really is like, well, what kind of person am I striving to be when it comes to how I treat people, when it comes to my relationships with others? One of the pieces of advice that I was going to share this morning, and maybe I just held off a little bit on a couple of thoughts, but is, even the fact that in the midst of conflict in relationships, that gives us really an opportunity to learn how to love each other even better. And to me, that statement has really helped define my perspective of getting along in churches and working in marriages and things like that. Like if we could understand that we can go to a deeper level with people that we have issue with, if we can learn how to love them. If there's conflict, we grow deeper. And we see that in our marriages. We see that in difficult relationships. If we stick it out, we learn a deeper appreciation for the other person.
Right. And, so often we think that a good church, the church that we're a part of, is only good if all the people all the time are free of conflict. Mm-hmm. And that just isn't going to happen.
Right.
And, I hate to admit this, and I confess this. It's a wrong thought that I've had over the years, but there have literally been times where I thought, you know what, if that person that I'm having this conflict with is going to be in heaven, man, I don't know if I want to spend eternity with them. And your Father, forgive me.
Sure.
People, as you hear this, forgive me. But in my humanity, sometimes I reach this point with people, and it just seems to be so brutal at times that it's like, how can we ever resolve these conflicts? Mm-hmm. And the reason why this is important is I know that the next several weeks we are going to be bombarded with relationship issues. There's going to be personal attacks like we've never even seen before over the next few weeks. And
I think you're referring to the election.
The election, and there has been Trump has announced his nominee for the Supreme Court, and I saw what happened with his last nominee, and now there's even more tension, and it's just going to be ballistic.
Yeah.
Now imagine this: can there be a day? And I don't know where these people are at spiritually, but I know that God can save everybody. That someone like Chuck Schumer and President Trump, or Nancy Pelosi, if they can sit down in heaven and enjoy a meal together and be all right with each other.
Sure.
And this is going to intensify, and over the next few weeks we're going to be angry with each other and angry with what we're hearing, and all these things are it's going to be a struggle. And so the reason why I confess, man, I have these bad thoughts is I'm coming to grips with, what? God has the ability to change me and my heart and change the other person's heart so that by the time we get to heaven, we won't be the sinful wrecks that we are right now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's something that we have to look forward to.
Yeah, and I think in our church, one of the things we probably focus on maybe more than anything else is we don't look upon the idea that other people are at fault or it's their sin. We really try to help people look at their own sin, their own selfishness. And when I think about like the passage in James chapter 4, when it says, why is there so many quarrels and fights among you? He answers that question with his answer isn't there, this war waging within your own heart, with your own soul? Like there's and Paul talks about the idea that, that there's these two forces, the spirit-filled life and the flesh, or the selfish, sinful life. Those two are waging war for his attention or for his heart or his mind. And because of that, if we are not winning the battle in our own life, the tendency is that we want to point and pick and prod at other people and their situations and their circumstances and say they're the reason we are having all these problems. Yeah. And, this morning you had talked to me, and I don't know how this necessarily fits, but I really appreciated the thought. Maybe you could expound on it. But the idea of unity over uniformity, I thought that was a really interesting thought. And if we're going to be in heaven someday with these people that we don't always maybe seem like we agree with here in this earth, like what would get us there, and would we be unified in heaven? Yeah,
what I was sharing with you this morning really is this misconception that we have that we believe that a unified church means that we are all have this uniformity of thought. And I don't think that's what God's design ever was. We do need people who look at things in different ways and have different type of opinions about things. That is part of our makeup, that we all have different personalities. So we should never mistake this diversity of thought as not being the opportunity of being unified.
Sure.
Because we can still unite together for the cause of Christ and still think completely differently, because God has called us to do different things on this planet. And we really need to have different people reaching different types of people, and we need different churches to reach these different types of people. And there will always be disagreements. And basically, you will see a lot of times Paul will be talking about there's some things that we need to be solid on and dogmatic about. Mm-hmm. Okay? There is only one way to heaven.
Yeah.
Sola fide. We got to be
alone.
strong on that. Okay? But in the midst of that, we've got to allow people to view things differently. Mm-hmm. And approach things differently, because that's the way the kingdom advances.
Yeah, and it says here in that 1 Corinthians 12 passage, it talks about the body has many parts, and it says here that we have been baptized into one body, one spirit, and we all share the same spirit.
Yes.
So it's interesting because there's the idea that we have unity, and yet it says right after this, yes, the body has many different parts,
Yes.
and not just one part. And then it uses the image of an actual body, and it says, if the foot says, I am not a part of the body because I am not a hand, that does not make it any less part of the body. And if I were an ear, I am not part of the body because I'm not an eye, that would not make it less than any part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would you hear? If the whole body were an ear, how would you smell anything? And it goes on and on and on and on.
Right.
But the thought behind it, and I appreciate our good friend Brian Holland, used to say the idea is we don't want to have all just eyes in the church. Mm-hmm. We don't just want to have all ears, right. And we don't want to just have feet. Like we sort of need a variety of people, and even in different passages in the scripture talk about the idea that we have many different parts, but we have the same spirit,
right?
Which is really, really important as well.
And that's why when we first started our conversation for this segment, I said, hey, this is something that has been present since the fall.
Yep.
And even if you look back to last week's passage when we were talking in 2 Corinthians, Paul even says, hey, I got to let you in on something. I'm not going to come visit you because it would just be this strong rebuke, and because I love you, I don't think that's the important thing. And he talks about how even the last letter that he wrote, which some people in their interpretation of what he was saying completely pulled him out of context and caused even more controversy. And he's now saying, I'm not going to visit you, and let me be honest with you, let me be upfront with you, because I'm concerned that even this is going to be misconstrued. Now the passage that you used today in Philippians chapter 2, and I was just asking you about these two people, but the chapter that you were in chapter 4, it starts off in verse 2. It says, now I appeal to, and I'm going to struggle with these words the same way you would, but it looks like it's Euodia and Syntyche.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. And it says, because you belong to the Lord, settle your disagreement. Mm-hmm. Okay, so here we are again, and these verses that we love to refer to in these things are born out of these interpersonal relational conflicts. And so the rich verses that we have here in chapter 4 of Philippians really arise out of this backdrop.
Right.
that there's something going on here. They're having a disagreement.
Yeah, and why don't you just tell them the story about these two?
Yeah,
I know
no,
we
that,
mentioned-
you're the expert. I absolutely.
Well,
know.
I guess we probably don't need to share the story. Most people probably already know.
Yeah,
Is that what we were
sure. It's
thinking? Okay.
so common. Not. I would have to be very hard pressed to figure that out and have to
Yeah.
spend a lot of time about it. But obviously, there's something going on here.
Settle your disagreement is an important thought. I mean,
Right.
and gosh, if we were a church community that always disagreed and we never had the ability to solve that, it would tear us apart. And I know that the passage that we've looked at too a lot is Galatians 5, and at the end of Galatians 5, it talks about if we continue to argue and fight amongst each other, we're going to devour each other.
Exactly.
And there's going to be this
Exactly.
inability to do what God calls us to do, which is most important.
Right.
It says love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
Well, when we say love your neighbor as yourself, that really is talking about relationship.
Yes.
That really is talking about this relationship. And obviously for me this morning, the direction I try to continue to steer us towards is the relationship with our Heavenly Father. And the strength comes from within what He gives us within. And it seems to me that when we're not right in that relationship, we really struggle in the person-to-person relationship.
Yeah.
And if that can change and if that can really work out, there's going to be a lot more that we have to offer and give and bless and kind of forgive and do the things that really relationships, every one of us need to do in our relationships.
Right. And I love where you went with this. I mean, obviously in chapter 4 is a verse that we've learned when we were young. We quote often, and that's this idea that I can do all things through Christ, who gives me strength. I was amazed that was the passage that you chose to use, that God led you to in the midst of talking about relationships, but it's very much there. And I was glad, if you weren't here this morning, after you preached that, then you went back in our blessing to some of these other very rich verses, and it's like, you know what, all of these very rich verses flow out of his instruction for these two in the midst of healing their disagreement, whatever it was.
And a letter to the church, which is very similar to what our charge was to our church today.
Exactly. And so after he says, hey, you guys need to work through this disagreement, by the time he gets to verse 4, he says, always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Okay? I knew that verse when I was a kid. Rejoice in the Lord always.
And again, I say
yeah.
rejoice.
Okay. So, but it's in the midst of relationships that he's telling me to rejoice, not in the midst of my personal trials, but in the midst between me and you, rejoice. And then he says, let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do.
Yep.
Okay. So he's getting to these things. And then the verse that I've quoted often, but never really considered it in the context of interpersonal relationships. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. And His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Now, let me ask you something, Josh. How does this verse relate to interpersonal conflict?
Well, I think we spend a lot of time worried about what other people think of us. I think we spend a lot of time trying to please, trying to work things out. And, I had people coming up to me after the service and said, thank you so much for what you shared, because it gave me a perspective that I haven't been able to see for a while, because I'm so worried. I'm so distracted. I'm so this, I'm so that. And when you said it, it gave me a perspective that my relationship with God needed to be in a better place. And I can't just expect. And so when we read this passage, don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything. What is it doing? It's shifting it on from our focus, our inward focus, and it shifts us back to our heavenly focus, or God's strength and His power, which brings us to 4:13, which is, I can do all things through Christ who gives us strength.
Right.
Well, okay, this is setting that up in a lot of ways, because it says, don't worry, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And it says, pray about things. Why? Because Christ has the power to fix the things. Right? And then when it goes, tell God what you need. Well, here again, trust in the Lord with all your mind. Lean not upon your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him. He will direct your path straight. He is the one that can guide us. And then when it says, and the verse 7 is one year specifically we're even describing, they're talking about, then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and your minds as you live. I think the idea of live in Christ Jesus. And so the challenge the idea that I can do all things through Christ, well, it's because Christ lives in us, and we are choosing to live in relationship with Him. So that gives us peace of mind, that gives us peace of heart. I could go probably 3 different verses in the Bible, and I could kind of go show you this in other places as well.
Right.
So.
Well, you see, here's the thing. Let's say you and I were having a conflict, which ultimately led to us having an argument.
Yep.
So often what happens with me is I feel like I have to win that argument.
Yeah.
That somehow I have to convince you of my side, or at least be able to clearly articulate that my side.
Yep.
Why do I do that?
Yeah.
Why do I feel like that is what has to happen here? And part of that is I'm not relying on this verse. I'm worried.
Yeah.
I'm worried that you're going to,
sure.
misperceive things. I'm worried that I might have to yield to you. I might have to give something to you that I'm going to lose.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all these things that I worry about. Mm-hmm. And so what that forces me to do is I argue more and more vehemently. Yeah. And I'll get louder and louder, and my anger will begin to rise. And it's no longer about whatever issue we were talking about. It's about all these other things that, get in the way.
Yep.
And that's why he's talking about here, saying, hey, why do we do this? Why are we worried about all these things? Let's just pray, and God's going to give me whatever it is that I need. I don't have to even win this argument.
Yeah, exactly. And in relationships, we love to be right. We want to be right. We want to be able to guide. We want to be seen as infallible in a lot of ways, because if we're seen that way, then maybe we feel accepted. Maybe we feel confident because okay, I'm okay.
And we feel like we're in control.
We're in control, absolutely.
Yes.
And the amazing thing is that we're not in control, and we need Jesus in our life to give us the control that we need. And yet what we do, though, typically is if we do feel like somebody says something to us and we take it in the way that we think they say it, sometimes that will go at the core of who we are, like that somehow we don't measure up, that somehow we have failed, that somehow we've not cast our cares upon Christ. We've basically said, if I make a mistake, I'm unworthy to be loved.
Right.
And so what I find interesting in this passage, the final word it says here, one final thing, is where do you fix your thoughts?
Exactly. This is so directly tied. And here again, my eyes have just been opened through what you did today, that he is giving us this instruction in the midst of interpersonal relational conflict. And now he is saying, fix your mind on one thing.
Yep.
Okay? This is really where the battle is. It's not with the other person.
Right.
And that's where I have it wrong. The battle is really what's taking place in my mind.
Yep.
And when I'm in this interpersonal conflict, I'm usually thinking bad thoughts about you, and I'm thinking that you want to take something from me, and then my mind starts going down this pathway of all of these horrible, horrible things, to the point where I'm kind of going, well, if you're going to be in there with me in heaven, I don't know if I want to be there.
Sure.
And so instead of thinking good thoughts even about heaven, I'm thinking these horrible, horrible, horrible thoughts.
Yeah, some of the advice that you've given me over the years, and when we do pre-marriage counseling, we usually tell people, or even marriage counseling, we tell people, like, why are you dwelling on such negative things?
Yeah.
You know, like one of the illustrations you used to share is the idea of the scrapbook.
Yeah.
You know, how many people put ugly pictures in a scrapbook?
Right.
No one does that, because you wouldn't want to look through a scrapbook of all your worst moments in your life.
Right.
Because that would bring you to an ugly place.
Exactly.
But when you do it, if you do put pictures in your scrapbook, what do? You put the best ones.
Exactly.
And the best moments, the moments that made you cry, the moments that made you laugh, the moments
Yes.
that made you have joy, the moments that brought confidence or a sense that the Spirit
You've
of God.
accomplished things. You're celebrating.
Yeah,
You're-
yeah, these
you know?
moments
Right.
of great, moments. And so when we're counseling people about relationships, and we're trying to help people, we say, why do you focus on all the negative
Right.
in your life? Because if you're focusing on all the negative, it isn't going to help you.
Exactly.
But here, the Bible says, fix your eyes on whatever's true, noble, right, pure, loving, admirable, whatever's excellent and worthy of praise.
Yep.
Those things would be great things to put in your scrapbook.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
And I think for people who get this, they probably will look at their spouse, they'll look at their friend, they'll look at their coworker, and they'll have such a different perspective, because they're going to say, you remember that time when they did this for me that helped?
Right.
Or when they took that shift for me that I needed, to be off. They did the dishes, or whatever it is. And if you dwell on those positive things, there's something that happens to your brain. There's something that happens to your heart.
Right.
There's a softening in your heart. There's a clarity in your brain. But what happens is our selfishness and our sin causes us to want to be negative and wants us to point at people and say it's their fault, not ours.
Yes.
And what does that do? It creates a different
Right.
tendency.
Right. And, one of the things I've realized, if we're talking about marriage, early on in our relationship with our spouse, even before the engagement, the thoughts that we had for that person were always about their positive attributes.
Sure.
That's what drew us to them. And over again in our minds back then, it was always about the good, and we would filter out the negative. Even though the negatives were there, we just had a way of saying, no, look at how good this person is. Well, 10, 15, 20 years go by, and you're right, we've replaced all those good thoughts with every one of their mistakes, every one of their failures, every one of their flaws, and we go over it over and over and over again. And there's no way that we can have healthy relationships. And one of the things that I really liked what you shared with us today is by the time you get to verse 13, that you've described how Paul has learned how to be content. And here again, I knew these verses before, never applied them to interpersonal relationships. But there's a very strong connection here. And the visual that you gave us when you asked Billy to come up and and you gave him that huge weight, and then you said, hey, can you also carry mine? I'm beginning to realize that there's usually a couple of things that go wrong for us in our interpersonal relationships. And one is, too often we are asking somebody else to do that which they are incapable of doing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That only God can do the thing that we're wanting that person to do, but we're placing that burden, instead of placing it on God, we are now placing it upon them. That it's your responsibility to make me happy. And so you better get to it, Josh.
Yeah, right.
And
I can't do that.
No.
Yeah.
No, you are not capable of doing that. But I keep asking you to do that, and every time you fail, I put that in my scrapbook in my mind, and I'm just kind of going, you're not measuring up to what I'm expecting you to do.
And you and I have both been in ministry for a long time, and you did youth ministry and things. And I remember years ago with the idea that there'd be parents that would come up and they would basically kind of offer you their child in a way and saying, hey, fix him, fix her, you know, and they would have this expectation that was really great. And to like, you know, this is what we need you to do. And in some ways it was the expectation that they were having going, we can't do these things, but maybe you can. And what ends up happening is like, you know, I remember, you know, these parents sometimes could be very like, you know, upset, and they could be like, he's not doing this or she's not doing this. And you know, you told her this or you told him that. And it's just this constant, you know, barrage of like, you know, negative negative talk and expectation and all these things. And I remember a wise word that I believe you had shared with me was, you know, sort of the redirect to them as saying, it sounds like you have a lot of problems at home.
Yeah.
Like in a way it was like coming back to saying, you haven't solved this yourself. So how do you expect your son, your daughter to have any ability to fix it? And then to put it upon the youth pastor or the church, it really is, here's my burden, you carry it.
Yes.
Or here's my burden, and here's my kid's burden, and now you carry it. And you go, I can point you to the one that can carry it, but you're going to need to step through the door to receive that.
Right.
You know, the one that can carry the burden.
Yeah. Well, and what I was saying earlier is one of the big problems that we have is we do expect the other person to do that which only God can do. But the second thing is what you just mentioned here, and that is we always underestimate our role in the problem.
Yeah.
You know, we have a way of just kind of saying, no, I didn't do anything wrong. We pass the blame. We no longer consider that this is our responsibility. We're always looking at the other person and saying they've got a problem. Mm-hmm. And it is truly like, hey, we've got this big log in our eye, but we can see the speck over there, and it's that speck that's the problem. It's not this big log that I'm carrying around. And that becomes the second big lie that the enemy is telling us. That they're telling us that the other person should be God for us, and they're saying that we have no blame in any of this. Mm-hmm. And so we underestimate truly the role that we have played in causing the problem.
Yep.
And both of those things need to be changed. First of all, the other person cannot be God for you. And so you have to be able to let God be God on those things. And then the other side of that is you have to come to the conclusion that, you know what, I am to blame here. And that doesn't mean that I'm condemned. No, but that's the only place where you can truly find help. If the problem is always something outside of you, then you are just constantly the victim. Mm-hmm. Okay, and you know, I've hung around alcoholics long enough where I know the 12 steps, and the very first step.
It's admitting that you have the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That you're
powerless to change.
Not only do you have the problem, but you are completely powerless to do this, and that really is where we need to be to start with having healthy relationships.
Yeah.
Is realizing that, hey, this is something that's wrong with me. I have a problem here, and I don't have the power to do it. But step number 2 is basically saying, hey, but God has the power to do it.
Absolutely.
And not only does he have the power to do it, he is willing to help me with this. If I would allow him to do it. So let's get busy, take that third step, and give him permission to bring about these changes. Yeah. But you know, so often it's always the other person is not doing what they're supposed to do. Oh yeah, well, what is it they're supposed to do? They're supposed to play the role of God for me. Yeah. And man, that's a hopeless place to be.
Yeah. We all have that tendency, that struggle to want to blame, maybe want to push off because of that struggle within us. And we're going to talk about this in our church for many, many years to come. And every conversation that I have, it does come back to that we have a sin problem. Right. We have a nature that's constantly waging war within our own heart and our own mind. And God came to set that free and to take the power of sin and selfishness away from us so that we could live in a new free life with the ability to reject the temptations or the ability to see things clearly. And the more of us that understand, the more that God has removed the veil from within our eyes, the more of us that has the scales that fall from our eyelids and the understanding of what God's trying to do, the better our world can be, the better our situation can be, the better our church can be, the better our families can be, the better our football teams can be, our businesses can be. It really is, how do we see the other person? Do we see them the way God sees us? I remember a video, one of those kind of the, welcome videos that we sometimes will play or videos to set up a sermon. And there was one where if you could put the glasses on of how Jesus sees you and have this kind of this compassion. And I remember the guy's walking around and he's having a bad day and he's trying to get his coffee and all these things and he's having a really difficult day. But every time he has those glasses on, he all of a sudden recognizes that the person that's lashing out trying to buy coffee was just divorced. The person that's selling the coffee, that person, she is she just had an abortion, or there's all these things that go on, and he walks out and he sees somebody that's looking happy, but he sees that she just lost her dad. No wonder we have so much burden though. Right. This is a broken and lost world, and because it's a broken and lost world, we needed a Savior. We needed help. That's the plan of salvation, is Jesus came to take away those burdens, or for us to be able to, as the Bible says, cast all your cares upon Him, for He cares for you. Yes. He's the God of comfort. He's the Prince of Peace. He offers us peace. He's a new King that allows us to come underneath Him and have this sense of that we are a part of His family and His kingdom, and His reign and rule in our lives will go on forever because He's the King and He takes over and He's in control.
Yeah. I think one of the things that have plagued us from the very beginning is our lack of understanding what unconditional love is all about. And as a result, we are constantly operating under a type of love that is very contractual. So we feel like somehow we have rights and expectations that when they aren't met, then the contract is null and void, and I now have license to mistreat somebody because of these things. And you go back even to the garden. As soon as God's asking, "Hey, did you eat from the tree?" Adam was already at that point going, "Hey, you know what? It was the woman that you
still blame
gave me. This wasn't my fault. It was hers and yours, God, for my situation." And rather than understanding that he's standing in front of the God who unconditionally loves him. And that really is where our struggle is. So as we 15 years ago began to write out what type of person do I strive to be, and we got to this section on relationships, we began to realize that, so often in this world, we find ourselves doing battle with others who are placing a conditional love expectation on us. And once we start doing that, that is when we begin asking other people to play God, or we deny that we have any role in that. And if you don't understand unconditional love, that's where you're forced to operate under. And so we begin to realize, in order for us to be healthy, we had to seek out some people that understood what unconditional love was all about.
Absolutely.
So that we could then at least just kind of go, oh, I can be honest with you. I can share with you in your burdens with no expectations at all. And I'm not beholden to anybody at that point. There's true love, and that way we could, as human beings, experience some freedom. But too often what ends up happening is, in the midst of doing ministry and what we are calling people to do, we're literally asking our people to go out there and love the way Christ loved. And he was loving people who didn't understand this concept of unconditional love. We want to be doing that, but we also have to realize that in the midst of that battle, it's too easy to lose sight of what unconditional love is all about.
Yeah, it is.
And finding those people in our lives who can help us through that.
Yep. That's the relationships that we need to have and be for
Yes.
other people as well.
Exactly.
And, right, and it does come back to, who do I strive to be?
Exactly.
Am I a friend to someone else? Do I relate to someone else in a way that is unconditional, that is thinking about their interests, not necessarily my own, that's willing to, carry their burden for a time? Someone had mentioned this morning to me, they said, it's nice to hear that I can help carry a burden, but I can give it back.
Right.
Like, it's not mine to carry, maybe for a moment or two, because we all need that for a moment or two, but ultimately God wants to carry your burden.
Exactly.
He wants to be the one. But the Bible speaks to carry each other's burden, help each other, be there for each other. This is real love. This stuff is good. And so I really hope that you're encouraged today. I know Pastor Don has been a really encouragement, and you've shown me that unconditional love for many years, and I appreciate it.
Goes both
Thank
ways.
you. And it's this relationship has allowed me to continue to be pastor of this church and in the community and the things like that. And there's been others of you that are watching, hopefully that you're watching, that have invested in my life as well. And I know there's many that I imagine you could thank as well over the years that have showed you the unconditional love that you've needed to continue to be this type of person in this world.
Yeah, and one of the verses we talked about last week, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Yeah. And what I found is when I'm with people like that, I then have freedom. And that freedom then gives me the opportunity to love others who are still in bondage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's because I know, hey, I can enter that world of bondage because I can come back to a place of freedom at any point. But if I was constantly entering the world of bondage, not believing that I'm ever going to be able to find my way out of there, why would I ever go back in?
Yeah, right.
And that's where we need to be that type of people where we are not putting burdens or placing people in bondage, but we're literally setting people free. And hopefully that is who we strive to be. And as we do that, we will be the love letter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of Christ. So the world will see this and they'll kind of go, man, that's weird. That person loved me and they don't want anything back for it.
Right.
How does that work?
Right.
Well, let me tell you how it works. I know a God that's how he operates.
Yep.
And that's what we need.
And we've talked about it, the idea, I believe I shared this last week, the idea that, maybe you're the only, person, or maybe you're the only Jesus that somebody ever sees.
Right.
That idea. Or, the other thought I have is I love the idea of, like that free people. That idea
Exactly.
that if we're free, and you've shared this challenge with me and many before, the idea of, if I truly want to be able to help someone, I need to be able to be, help myself. Like, I need something to change in me. Right. If I'm not free, then how can I free someone else? And, well, thanks for joining us for Pastor's Perspectives. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and this topic. I hope that you get a chance to kind of comment some of the things you may have thought or learned or things that you're going to try, because, hey, we're kind of all in this together, trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and let me leave you with the main verse from today's sermon. you can't do this on your own. Some of you have been watching us and you're kind of going, but Pastor, what? You don't understand. Wait a minute. Yeah, are you really wanting me to do this? Do you really think that I can possibly love this way? You can't on your own. But here's the good news.
I can do all things.
You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. It gives you the strength to do it. And, you know, if you're looking at this, you're going, it's an impossible task. Let me reassure you, it is, but it's not impossible for God. Yeah. It's impossible for you to do with him. It's not impossible. So the best advice I can give you is you gotta give that burden to him and let him set you free.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next week.